So I put up a question on Instagram asking for your hot takes and your spiciest of opinions. I've seen a number of people put up videos reacting to other people's unpopular bookish opinions, and I thought, I want to do that. Starting strong with Mistborn isn't that good. Now this is one I can completely understand. I've seen this opinion before. It's wrong. No, I'm not going to say that. Mistborn is one of those series where it's so unbelievably popular that I think people go in with really high expectations. But one of the reasons why it's so popular is I've seen that a lot of people have read that as their introduction to adult fantasy. And I think it's terrific as an introduction to adult fantasy. And that's where I read it as well. That was my introduction to adult fantasy. And then people really grow attached to the books that brought them into the genre, or the adult version of the genre. But I don't think it's that uncommon for people who have read a ton of the genre already to not jibe with it. This is one of the reasons why I'm really afraid to go back and reread it, because I love it so much and it means a lot to me. I know some people don't like it because it's very youthful. They don't like Sanderson's stripped back prose style, and especially when it's younger in tone. I know some people have argued that Mistborn is also YA, so it's kind of straddling that line between YA and adult. So I'm not overly surprised, but the answer's still no. It's not. Next we've got The Hobbit is better than Lord of the Rings. Ooh, okay, that's a spicy take. That's tough because they're actually really different stories. It's been years and years since I've read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there is quite a big difference even just in how they are written. The Hobbit is a lot more youthful, whereas Lord of the Rings is a lot more dense. The Hobbit is very accessible, it's a lot easier to read and it's a lot more compact, whereas Lord of the Rings is very dense. Especially with that generation of fantasy books, they were very description heavy, particularly Tolkien. He really liked talking about trees. I mean, so The Hobbit's definitely more streamlined and focused in my opinion, but I don't know. I can definitely see why people would think that. I think I'm gonna have to say The Lord of the Rings is better for me in my opinion. I like the epic scale and I like the characters in Lord of the Rings better than The Hobbit. But The Hobbit has so much charm and it's such a fun read. Orca is a very overrated character. I understand how she cares deeply about her son, but that's her whole personality and it makes her feel one-dimensional. There are no different struggles or issues she has to deal with, it's only one. I feel like this is targeted. This feels targeted, talking about Mistborn, Lord of the Rings, and Orca. I love Orca. I think Orca's great. Orca's from the Bloodsworn saga. And the opinion's wrong. It's funny because this sounds very similar to some of the criticisms that I hear about Tau in Rage of Dragons. They're very single-minded in what they're very narrowed in on their goals. Tau wants revenge, Orca wants to get her son back. But to me, that's partly what makes them such an interesting character, because it takes a unique person to be that singularly focused on one outcome. It really shows how their minds work and how important these things are to the character. I can see how Orca's driving force, the thing that is really driving her is to save her son, is there isn't a lot of layers to that dynamic. However, I do think that she is a fleshed out character in other areas. As the story goes on, we really learn more about her backstory, so I'm trying to keep this spoiler free. Once you see all that, she becomes a much more fleshed out character and you can see why she's doing some of the things that she's doing. The two characters she meets along the way and she's helping out, I think is a really interesting dynamic as well, especially because she's helping them with their problems and how their problems are very similar to hers, and how she kind of empathizes with them. So I understand. Here's another one I get. So I personally don't think she's one-dimensional. Oh, the age-old question. Hardbacks are better than paperbacks. I am one of those psychos that really likes reading hardbacks. And the reason why is when I am reading a paperback, I am always so worried about cracking the spine. I hate cracking the spine. I don't like how it looks. So when I'm reading paperbacks, I'm always really conscious about it when I'm reading. Whereas when I'm reading a hardback, they're a lot more robust. I can sit, with the page wide open and not worry about cracking the spine. However, I do think that the US floppy paperbacks that don't crack the spine no matter what you do is the best format. In the UK, we do get very rigid paperbacks where they don't open super wide, whereas the big US paperbacks, look at that. Look at that floppage. And I don't need to worry about cracking the spine with that. So I'm going to say yes, I agree, but with US paperbacks. Next up we have Mistborn Saga Era 1 and 2 is better than Stormlight. Ooh. Maybe. As I said earlier, I'm really connected to the Mistborn books because they were my opening into fantasy books. However, standing back, I think that Stormlight is a better series because I connect more with the Stormlight characters than I do the Mistborn ones. I love the characters in Mistborn, but I just love the cast in Stormlight so much. I also think that Stormlight has an unfair advantage, and this isn't just towards Mistborn, this is compared to all book series, that because it's really long, you spend longer with the characters and you spend longer connecting to them. You can connect them to parts of your life as well. I can tell you exactly what I was doing when I was reading The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. I definitely think there is a connection between how long a book series is and how long you've been reading it, and how that time makes you more connected to the characters. However, that wouldn't work if the series was terrible. It still needs to be a good series, but I think that it does play a part. But again, personally I think Stormlight's better, but everybody's going to be different. It just depends on what you connect and when you read it. Swearing is really unnecessary in fantasy. I will always stand by that. I'm going to go on the basis that you mean swearing as in our swearing rather than in-world swearing, because that's a different topic completely. Real swearing, it doesn't bother me. I know it bothers some people and they put a book down when it's got things like that. I think it all depends on the context of the story. Like if I was reading a really dark, gritty story and it has swearing in it, fine. If I'm reading a heroic fantasy story, I would usually not expect there to be swearing in that. I do think it can be used cheaply, even in dark, gritty stories, but it can have a benefit to it. Like there's a reason that swear words have so much impact. They're the forbidden words, the big no-nos. So if a character's using them willy-nilly and they don't really care, then that says a lot about their character and their personality. Equally, if someone is more proper and doesn't like using bad language, but then when they do use it for something, there has to be strong foundations for them using that language, and that could be a really interesting play and subversion of expectations. I am actually currently reading The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and one of the guards swears quite a lot, and it felt quite jarring because the main two point of view characters are children. They don't really swear. However, I think it really suited the guard character, and also there was a really interesting line later on from one of the children's point of view where they mess up or something goes bad and they go, oh hell, and then there's a bit of internal dialogue about the character thinking, I would really have liked to have used one of the words that the guard used, but it would have felt silly coming from me and forced, which I think is interesting because it would have. So while I don't want to see it in every fantasy book and I don't think it has a place in every fantasy book, it doesn't bother me when it comes up if it's used well. I've tried reading The Hobbit like 3 times and just couldn't get into it. Ooh. I think that's fair enough. It's very different from modern fantasy, and if you're used to reading modern fantasy, or to be fair, even older fantasy, it's very light-hearted. So if that's just not your thing, then that's fair enough. Okay, so we've got a couple of responses. The Poppy War trilogy is a bit overhyped. The Poppy War is meh. The tonal shift into brutal warfare ruined a good school trope. I've not read The Poppy War, so I can't really comment on this one. I do think it's interesting that the tonal shift was brought up. I've not read it, so I can't say for sure, but that could be just the promise being set up was that it would be more of a school-style story, and then this tonal shift is just not being promised early enough in the story that it didn't feel warranted to take that turn. Could be a case why. I think tonal shifts are really difficult things to do because you're going to turn some people off that are really enjoying how the story is playing out at the moment. I also think they can be done really well. It can be really interesting to have this story flip on its head. I'm interested to see where I fall in it when I read the Popular. Robin Hood is a good writer but an awful storyteller with bad plot. I'm going to assume that's meant to be Robin Hobb. Again, this is another one where I can't give much of an opinion because I've not read any Hobb yet. I'm planning on reading it very soon. I've got a couple books that I promised I would get to that I really need to read first, but I am going to film a whole video of me starting the journey into Hobb's work. She's constantly praised for her prose style and also her character work. So an awful storyteller with bad plot. The awful storyteller part is something that will be very individualized. It will be depends on what you're looking for in a story. So because she got such good character work, I've heard, I assume people who are very character-led readers would really enjoy her books, whereas someone who's looking for a more plot-based book are probably not going to enjoy it as much. The criticism that I have heard come up with Hobb's books is the pacing. I've heard that her stories are really, really slow. So character-led, really, really slow books. I can definitely see how some people wouldn't jive with that. Bad plot, you're gonna have to let me know. Hobb fans, or Hobb not fans, let me know, what did you think of Hobb? Has she got bad plot? I don't know if it is genuinely that the narratives just aren't that interesting, or if it is still just a pacing issue, because the pacing is something that I've heard come up more than once with her books. But yeah, I'll be reading it soon, so I'll be able to have an opinion very soon. Harbinger of Justice coming June 9th. Disclaimer, probably won't be as good as June. Well, this is interesting. Grimdark doesn't exist, but there's too many people trying to poorly copy Abercrombie. I can definitely see where this person is coming from. Grimdark is one of those things where the lines are very blurred, and people even have a different definition of where those lines blur. So what is considered grimdark, what makes grimdark grimdark, is something that's talked about a lot. Obviously it comes from the word grim and dark, so you know it's going to be a very dark story, but how dark makes grimdark grimdark? Someone who hasn't read a lot of grimdark, I don't feel qualified to answer that. So to say it doesn't exist, I kind of get it, because if no one can define it, and no one can say this is what grimdark is, it's quite a difficult thing to set a definition to. Then does it exist? If you change each part of the bicycle one at a time, is it still the same bicycle after all the parts are changed? We're not getting into existentialism. Let's not go there. But yeah, okay, I can see where the opinions come from. As for the second half, too many people are poorly trying to copy Abercrombie. I'm going to assume you mean other grimdark books, but I will add, Abercrombie didn't create grimdark, so I don't think just by having a very grimdark book, maybe low and fancy with a sprinkling of humor, doesn't make it a Joe Abercrombie copy. He definitely didn't come up with this setup. However, are there a lot of people out there trying to replicate Joe Abercrombie's style? Probably. I think you could have a whole topic discussion just on how close influences are and how unique an idea has to be for it to be not a copy. Because one of the things a lot of people say about The Ember Blade is how similar it is to The Lord of the Rings. However, I look at that as being a very positive thing. The aspects are very Lord of the Rings-esque, and it's clearly wearing its inspiration on its sleeve, are the elements I really like about the story. However, it's still a very unique story with its characters and the world setting and the themes that it explores. It also has darker elements than The Lord of the Rings and also a lot more humor than The Lord of the Rings does. So is it like Lord of the Rings? Yes. Is it still its own thing? Definitely. Is it amazing? Yes. And yes, I managed to fit Ember Blade in this video too. You should go read it. So I think there's an interesting topic here about how closely you skirt the line between rip-off and inspiration. Because with someone as popular and successful as Joe Abercrombie, you are going to get people trying to rip them off. Enemies to best friends is a million times better than enemies to lovers. Yes. I think both these tropes are really interesting because you do get to see a big change in a relationship between two characters, which have done well. I actually really enjoyed both of them. Drastic changes in character arcs, interesting depth and complexities to people. Because I really like reading platonic friendships in fantasy. You're Aaron and Cade in The Ember Blade. You've got Sam and Frodo in Lord of the Rings. Locke and John in The Lies of Locke Lamora. Wax and Wayne in Mistborn Era 2. Sometimes it's really interesting to see lifelong friends. Godkiller was the worst sequel ever, made me quit the series. This was meant to be God's Grave. I checked. But she means God's Grave as in the sequel to Nevernight. Which is actually really interesting because I have heard from a lot of people that they prefer the sequel. I read Nevernight and it was one of my favourite reads of last year. I've not read God's Grave yet, but I'll probably get to it towards the autumn time. But I'd mainly heard that God's Grave was better, so I'm interested. People who have read all of the Nevernight Chronicles, which was your favourite book? Or rank them. Tell me which one's the best one and which one's the worst one. We'll do one more just because I think it's funny. I don't understand monster smut. Me neither. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's responses. Got quite a few, so if you're interested in seeing another one, I could do another one. Let me know. Do you want to see more of this type of video? And let me know, what is your unpopular bookish opinion? Do you agree or disagree with the ones in this video? I'll check the comments in this video if I'm going to do a part 2. Maybe we'll take some answers from there as well. But yeah, thank you for watching and outro.